Hey guys, on today's episode we're working on this 1970 Mustang Mach 1 351 in purple. Absolutely awesome. I have a soft spot for these cars. When I was a kid I had a 1989 Mustang LX in white. Oh, I loved it, but I always wanted one of these, a little bit out of reach. Now if you remember, this car was parked next to the Superbird when we were at the North American Motor Car group there where all the cars were in the back. This is one of them that needs to be cleaned up. You can see it's dusty, it's got swirls and stuff everywhere. The tires are kind of ratty, so we're gonna have to clean those up. But it's going to the RM auction next week, so it's one of my favorite cars. So got a lot to do. Let's get started. First up, fill your wheel bucket with wheel soap and paint bucket with paint soap and some fresh towels. Then I pre-rinse the paint. Ho! On older cars like this one, it's always a good idea to check the windows when you're power washing to make sure that they're not sort of dramatically leaking from old seals or old gaskets going bad. It's definitely something to take notice of when you're power washing. Next, fill your foamer with a bit of soap. 3 or 4 squirts is usually enough to do about 1 car or so. Then add water and give it a swirl, not a shake, which of course might irritate James Bond, but it will give you a thicker foam on the car. Then give the paint safe agitation with a clean microfiber towel folded into 4s. Only use them until they become dirty, then you can put it in a slop sink or wherever. Then grab a new towel from your soap bucket to avoid cross-contamination. Next, agitate the tight spots with an interior tight brush with longer bristles to flush out the junk your towels couldn't reach. Now, the first step is a wash. That's the one with the towels and kind of just agitating things. The second part here with the brush, I kind of think of it like a wash slash detail when I explain it to enthusiasts in training because you're really going the extra step here. Afterwards, thoroughly rinse the paint. Now, keep in mind that this is not just about removing soap from the paint, it's about dislodging dirt and contaminants from the jams and the tight spots that of course can interfere with your polishing or your final detailing. Again, this becomes more relevant depending on how in-depth you choose to go with your detailing percentage. If you're doing just a basic wash, then fine, this may not be super critical, but if you're gonna be polishing soft paint like this one, then this step isn't just for basic soap removal. Normally I do the wheels first because I'm outside doing a car, let's say in your driveway, but because I'm indoors in the studio, I work the wheels last this time because I'm in no hurry with respect to the sun drying out all the water, that kind of thing. Here I also use Titan 12 degreaser instead of Plum wheel cleaner because the wheels and the rubber had this kind of film on them, I guess from years of just sitting there, and not so much brake dust from, let's say, daily driving. Being a muscle car, the engine is the heart of the Mach 1, and it's carbureted, and it's going to RM in 2 weeks, and I don't want any issues. So I played it safe, and I used Frothy in the Pro Foamer to clean up the dust and the light grease spots. A lubricant cleaner, terry towel, and compressed air can be your best friend in these situations. Now, if you happen to follow my Instagram, you may have noticed that I cut up the floors once again, FYI, that's the 3rd time, to put brand new lifts in that are a bit wider and a bit longer, and I repitched the floors. So with all the new lifts comes new, thicker rubber pads for the lift points under the car. So naturally, I usually do the underneath of the car first, but I switched it up for absolutely no reason other than I was excited to wash the purple paint first. Underneath the car, it looked exactly as you might expect it. It's not Pebble Beach, but it's also not a daily driver either. Next, I filled the foamer with Brute wheel soap and went to town. back down, I did my final blowout before starting the interior. Inside were spiders, some dirt, and lots of dust from just sitting in storage, which is pretty typical. Then I used lather and an interior brush to freshen up the plastics and the center console, but on the super tight spots, I used a stiff bristle stitch and seam brush for the steering wheel and the seat stitching because of how narrow this new brush is. One of my favorite places to clean is the gas pedal, the brake pedal, and of course the clutch if it has one. This narrow brush can get in between those vertical grooves really well. After a light cleaning, you can see that there's just pebbles jammed in all the vertical grooves here, so I got a screwdriver, which was my best option at the time to dislodge the grooves before I re-cleaned it once again. Quick FYI, if you want to talk about therapy, spend 15 minutes cleaning your pedals and tell me you don't forget about the 100 emails waiting for you on your computer. This is a great way to sort of release the mind. Okay, something to keep in mind when you're working on older cars. First thing is the interior has amazing pieces. Look at this wood steering wheel. I just think older cars just have that extra special feeling to it. But one of the other things that comes with an older car is older carpet. Now that is a little bit of a pain in the butt from a detailing perspective. Think of it sort of like modern cars, but in the trunk, something like a Volkswagen or the very nappy feel where the dirt gets trapped in there and it's challenging to get out with that first vacuum. You all can kind of figure out, oh yeah, I see what he's saying. So what you do on this one is take compressed air, blow it a little bit before you vacuum out, because you tend to vacuum and then you're doing something, you're using compressed air, let's say on the seat or the ceiling or the steering wheel, and you'll blow something up and you're like, oh man, where did this dirt come from? So keep that in mind. A lot of times I can't do it now because it's too loud, but I'll take the vacuum with the vacuum on and take compressed air, which by the way is the best detailing tool ever, and blow it and have the vacuum on so it's catching a lot of the junk. That's the best way to do it. The second way is you can tamp it, and a lot of junk just comes out. Do that at the same time as you're vacuuming, or you can use one of those rubber combs as well. Typically I use that in the back and it's usually more for hair, but keep all of that in mind, otherwise you'll be chasing your tail on older cars. The doors were just blotchy and had a bit of oil from the hands getting in and out, and you can see lots of dots everywhere on both the driver's side and passenger side door. Once we were done with that, we worked on the seats as well. Next up was restoring the paint, but first I needed to protect the original matte hood and the various decals. Okay, I'm behind the camera now. As you can see, there's matte finish. Doing the paint, not a big deal. Playing with the matte, that is a bit of an issue. A lot of the white parts, little pieces, it looks like paint. I don't know what it is came out, but there's still some there. I don't know if you can see that. So I'm gonna have to play with this later. Clearly there was some wax or something touched right there. I'm not sure if you can see that, right there-ish. So this is a whole different beast than the paint. The paint's gonna be pretty straightforward. Now, so I put masking tape there because I don't want any issues. Now here you can see the white lines there? Now watch what I do with my finger. Got my little, on the edge of the little edge right there. Take my finger and I go like this. See the white stuff coming out? That's old wax residue. See a little dust? So I'm gonna have to play with that later. Now, notice the little cut right there, and notice that this is original, or at the very minimum, very, very old. I have the door open because it's like 100 degrees outside. So what I'm gonna do is tape this up. Wow, look at all this residue. I'm gonna tape this up because if I hit it with the pad, it's very likely that I'm gonna rip all of this off. So one big fat piece of tape right there, and I'm just gonna avoid it. At this point, I always measure the paint, especially on older cars, just to get a feel for what I have to play with respect to how much paint is there. Okay, we're gonna do a quick walk around the car. At this point, all the tape is on. I'm ready to polish, but of course, we're gonna do a little bit of paint depth gauge here to figure out where we are. First things first, you can see real quick, got about 12. Now I've done the rest of the car already. 12, 26, a little bit of variation here if you go to the roof. Not too bad. Relatively consistent. Inside of the door jamb. Now the reason we do the inside of the door jamb is typically not as much paint is put on the inside of the door jamb because it doesn't hit, see, 4.3, it's usually less. People try to save money on the door jambs. They're not going to go as nuts because why? The door is closed and it's not getting hit with a lot of UV. Now if we come to the back here, where we have a little bit of issues, as you can see, I have to be careful around here. Common with older cars. Boom, we jump right up. In the 40s, and look, even higher, and then we start coming down a little bit towards the end here. But huge difference, variation from, let's say, 7 or 8 all the way to 40. I'm behind the camera now. We started off over here, and I used that pad right there, which is a microfiber cutting pad with blue, and then I followed up with the yellow pad. Now, as you can see, it's better, but it's not that great. You see all the swirls in there? So I still need to play with something. Something wasn't right. So then I went over and I used the wool pad. I used the wool pad on this side, and then I cut it, and afterwards I went back and hit it with the yellow pad and the yellow polish. The difference here is I made sure I blew it out a whole lot more. So this is again, do you see the swirls there? I still have to finish that final little part there, but significantly better. Here's the original. So again, before step 1, there's still some heavier scratches in there. It's hard to tell with this light. And then this is the option that I'm going to go with. You can actually see it's a little bit deeper color afterwards. So essentially what's happening is this is incredibly soft, and if you don't blow out the yellow pad with compressed air and put a tiny little dot on there, it's a nightmare because you're constantly scouring the paint. So you're trying to minimize the amount of abrasion or abrasive that you have, and that's why you're barely using anything on the yellow pad. That's what I'm going to be doing on the rest of the paint, and it's going to get it about 90% there because I don't want to go too much because, again, this is a little bit finicky paint. Now check these out. These are my new wheel covers I got from my buddy Alex in Switzerland. I use them to keep the wheels and tires from getting compound and especially wool fibers on my freshly clean shoes. I appreciate this super kind gift. Now, detailers helping detailers is what it's all about, so huge thank you to Alex. Thanks, bud. All right, so after doing this for 20-something years, I tend to forget that I don't have a nice lift here. That was the whole idea because I'm a pretty tall guy and it's very challenging for me to get up and down, and more importantly, when I'm on my knees polishing, that's when things go wrong with my back and I have a lot of back issues. So when you see me polishing at this height, a lot of times if I don't have a lift, I'll lay on my back. Why? The whole reason is if you look at my arms, as I extend the arms, of course you have less strength here. Like if somebody were to push on my arms right here, it'd be harder to do that. If I keep my arms in like this, you have all of your muscle here. It's centered in your body, and as I'm polishing, I have a lot more strength. It'd be a lot harder to, hypothetically, if somebody to push down on here. Now, if I grab the polisher, if you see me polishing like this, locked in, that is the ultimate way. I'd rather move back and forth, maybe a little bit. My arm comes out a little bit like that, but anytime I'm like this or down and doing that kind of thing, that's when your back explodes. Again, I would imagine not everybody has a lift because not everybody's doing this 24 hours a day like I'm doing it, but the idea is if you're laying on the ground or you're on top or wherever it is, just always think, center your body, lock those elbows in as close to you can as possible. If not, extend just a little bit and it'll save your back. And I don't know why I just realized halfway through the car, oh, wait a second, I have a car lift. I should probably use it. All right, here we go. Let's get back to work. Now check this out. On my driver's side door, notice my yellow pad exploding and becoming unbalanced. Now, I barely touched a sharp trim piece and the pad was just sliced open. Now, when this happens, which it will from time to time, you need to switch pads, as this little like flapping piece can cause fine polishing sort of swirls or inconsistencies in the finish. So just take your pad off, replace it. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it's easier than having to chase this final finishing. Okay, after a couple of hours, we finished the paint and the plum looks amazing. Now let's turn our focus onto the matte finish paint on the hood. Now, back in 1970, only the Mach 1s came with this setup, but the big idea is how do you clean it? How do you maintain it? Can you polish it? Can you not polish it? And sort of unraveling that is understanding the difference between, let's say, single stage and or clear coat versus something like matte paint. To do that, let's run upstairs to the classroom, do a little bit of board work. Okay, before we clean something properly and safely, we need to know the difference between, let's say, normal single stage or clear coat versus matte finish paint. So we'll start with single stage or clear coat. We'll just call it paint from now on, just to make it simple. So in theory, paint is flat, and then you have a bit of a scratch, let's say, and the paint is flat. Now, in reality, the paint really looks like this under a microscope. But again, this is after like Kevin Brown or Kilmer or something, right? Where you're flattening it out and it looks absolutely amazing and it goes to a car show. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's pretend that it's not really wavy, it's just a flat line. When the sun hits it, it bounces right back. It's got that perfect reflection and everybody's happy. Now you get a scratch, the light comes down, goes into here, shoots out this way. Light comes down, goes into here, shoots out that way. Now we have all this light going in funky, areas, and we don't like that, right? So that's what we call a scratch. So for the demonstration purposes here, this is a big old scratch. Now you've seen in the past, we sometimes just make life easy. We take it and we go, now we're gonna take the scratch out, and we go from the bottom up. In reality, that doesn't make any sense because we'd be going underneath, going from underneath the paint, which would be inside and out. Doesn't make sense. So what we really do is when we put the polisher down on something like this, we're just kind of curving these edges here, right? Curving it so it's less violent of a V, right? So the sun kind of gets trapped in here a little bit and doesn't necessarily go out in so many different directions, meaning it looks better. Now, what we're really doing is taking this line, which was right here, and we're just lowering it, right? As we're polishing, we're just lowering it. So this really becomes like this now. It comes like this, and then there's a little bit of a dip. That's assuming you don't get it out perfectly or you don't have as much clear coat as you want to play with. You've really softened, you kind of stretched that line out. Okay, totally makes sense. That's a very, very short version of regular paint. Now, when we come to matte paint, why it's so different and why we have to approach it differently is matte paint, again, for demonstration purposes, looks like this. Now, if you have a scratch in it, and then it's like this. What happens? The sun comes down, the light comes down, it gets trapped in here. Boom, 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 bounces in here. The light comes down, comes in here, boom, bounces in here, boom, bounces in here, boom. And so basically it's just collecting a lot of that light. That's why it looks matte. Okay, so what does that all mean now that we know that it's a little bit different? Again, this is for demonstration purposes, just to kind of get a point across. So now that you have this as matte finish paint, if you go in there and you polish it just like I did on the plum version of the paint, the single stage or the clear coat paint, what's happening is I'm sanding this down, sand, 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 sand. And now what happens is you have this, right? Forget about that because I can't reach that right now, right? So now as the sun comes down, when I say sun, I mean light, obviously. Now it comes down and goes ding, 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 in here. Ding, ding, ding. There's smaller little gaps. What that means is you have a now more reflective surface on the, so it's less matte. Now, if you keep sanding it down past here, I'm gonna go right here, right? You sand it down, you get these little things. Now it's just regular paint, right? It's pretty shiny. So why am I making this big deal? I can't go in there and sand that down because there's watermarks in there. So what we have to do, if we go back to the way it really is, so there's some issues down in here, right? There's some water spots, maybe there's some water spots up here. I have to, instead of using abrasion, meaning mechanical, I have to use chemical to get in here. So in this case, I'm probably gonna use isopropyl alcohol, maybe mix 50-50. And I'll post a link down in the description of this video as well to a PPG article that's really great. And you can kind of say, oh, I can understand how PPG, one of the world's leading manufacturers of paint, how they suggest cleaning it. And basically it's no abrasion, and your goal is to remove oils that build up. So if you were to wax the car right now or wax that spot, you're just gonna fill up those mountainous, the crevices, the peaks and valleys here. The valley parts you're gonna fill up, And as you fill them up, the light comes down, and guess what happens again? There's nowhere for the light to go except back up, meaning that's great. That's like what we try to do on normal paint, right? But in this case, if you have matte paint and you put wax on it, you're gonna turn it shiny. So you can see you have to adjust it. So the bottom line is I'm gonna be cleaning it with isopropyl alcohol. I think 50-50 mix. I'll play with it a little bit. And then at the end, I might put a specific coating on there that I've tested and it works. Of course, I'm talking about Reflex, where it really just kind of coats the inside of these things and it'll make the depth a little bit better, meaning it'll be more rich, not necessarily shiny, just a deeper matte. So play with that, do it on a little inconspicuous area and see if you like that. But that's the plan. You can't just go after it as you normally would. Anyways, lesson over. Let's go back downstairs and get this car ready to go. First, I removed the protective tape and used my 50-50 pre-mix of isopropyl alcohol very gently. Light wiping or soaking is best, but play with it to understand how hard or soft the matte finish is on your particular project. On that white or blotchy spot I showed in the beginning of the video, I left a puddle of the iso for a few minutes while I tried removing the white specks from the surrounding area. Once everything was clean, I did my first test on the back area that was matte on the trunk. And you can see a clear difference from left to right. There's a little line right there. The left side is much deeper matte color compared to the right side, which is a bit more what I like to refer to as whitish black or whitish matte. So with the test spot approved on the rear, I finished both the matte and the purple paint in Reflex Pro. Now, one tip for matte is to use less liquid, even it out as much as possible, meaning with the applicator pad, have nice smooth strokes, and then buff it off a little bit quicker to control the desired level of depth on the matte, meaning if you leave it a little bit longer, it's going to be a little bit shinier, or let's say less matte, or if you take it off a little bit quicker, it's going to be less shiny or a little bit more matte. You have 100% control on that. Now notice the difference in the lights on the hood from the left side to the right side. You choose what you prefer and then just adjust the level of coating in the dry time to increase or decrease the amount of depth. It's totally up to you. Now I repeated the same Reflex Pro process on the rest of the paint. Finally, I used metal polish to remove the light oxidation on the chrome bumpers and the beloved Mustang emblem that needed a fresh comb through its mane. I cleaned up the really bad glass with multiple towels, squeegee, and obey, and conditioned and protect the seats with mousse and let it soak in for an hour. Then I took my wheel covers off and fed the thirsty rubber, which soaked up 2 coats of ammo mud, by the way, before my surprise visit from Andy at NAMC to check on his car before it heads out to auction. Now, these guys seem to find rare or lost cars every day. I get to clean them up, but they get to redo the mechanicals and get them back on the road. So check out their website because they have new stuff for sale every day. I have no idea how they find these cars, but whatever. It keeps me super busy and I get to shoot some cool videos. So big thank you to those guys. Well guys, the Mustang is done and this thing looks amazing. I love the color. Plus I had an old version, a 1989 version of the Mustang, so it's a soft spot in my heart. From a detailing perspective, this was a little bit more challenging. Why? Because as it turns out, this really has been repainted. I don't know when, in this beautiful plum color, but when things are repainted, sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging. Each panel is a little bit different than the other one. So in past episodes, you can just do step 1, step 2, step 3 type thing. In this one, you kind of have to change it for every single panel, meaning this one was reacting different than the rear quarter. And for me as a detailer, it's nice to have a little bit of a challenge. So I love cars like this. Now, as you can see way back there, we have a 1969 Pontiac Le Mans 350 that has been sitting in a barn for 22 years. Now, very lastly, it is the same owner as the guy who had the Superbird, super amazing dude who let me drive the car. And I said, hey, if you let me drive that one, what about this one? He's like, yeah, go ahead. And I said, you got brand new tires back there. We don't want to let this go with brand new tires. So do you mind if I leave a little rubber on the road? And he said, absolutely. So let's go do that now. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.